Thank you all for being here. My name is Clara Kim. I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs here at MOCA, and really pleased to be introducing tonight's program. I am the curator of this series, MOCA Artist Film Series, and it really is and aims to be hopefully a dynamic and generative platform for the presentation of artist films. And it's inspired by the works in our collection, in the MOCA collection, the film and video works that are in the renowned collection of MOCA. And what we really aim to do is bring films here from across time periods, but crucially with artists present and in conversation with the leading practitioners of today. So I'm really pleased to be introducing tonight's program. And I'm very pleased to have organized this with my colleague Elisa Oros, who's here in the audience. And we want to also thank the Edward F. Lemotto Foundation for making it possible. Tonight's program really exemplifies what we hope to do with the series, which launched earlier this year and will continue on through the calendar year. And it's the importance of the collection and of works in the collection, such as the work that we screened earlier today in this very room, a work called Chang'an Boulevard from 2004. It's an epic moving image work by Weiwei, made in 2004 at a very critical moment in history. And I think the work is not only a beautiful work of art, but a really important record of time, a place in transition. So I'm sure he'll talk more about that. And I also want to thank the East-West Bank, because the work is in our collection through a promised gift of East-West Bank. And so we want to thank them for making this possible. So as a way to introduce the three speakers tonight very quickly, forgive me, I'll read a little bit of their biography. Ai Weiwei needs no introduction, but is one of the leading artists of our time. He has a diverse and prolific practice that encompasses sculptural installation, filmmaking, photography, ceramics, painting, writing, and social media. He is a conceptual artist who fuses traditional craftsmanship with his Chinese heritage. Weiwei moves freely between a variety of formal languages to reflect on the contemporary geopolitical and socio-political condition that we live in. Ai Weiwei's work and life regularly interact and inform one another, often extending to his activism and advocacy for international human rights. And Weiwei comes to us fresh off a plane from New York, where he was participating as one example of the many fields and audiences he reaches. He was part of the 2023 Clinton Global Initiative, where he was interviewed by Hillary Clinton, and I hope he'll speak a little bit about that as well. He is joined on stage by no other than Charles Gaines, one of the pivotal figures in the field of conceptual art, one of the most influential artists working today in Los Angeles as an artist, as an educator, a writer and thinker. Charles engages formulas and systems in his work that interrogate relationships between the objective and subjective realms. Using a generative approach to create series of works in a variety of mediums, he has built a bridge between the early conceptual artists of the 1960s and 70s and subsequent generations of artists pushing the limits of conceptualism today. Thank you so much, Charles, for being here. And lastly, I'm very pleased to be introducing Johanna Burton, our Maurice Marciano director at MOCA, a position she has held since November 2021. She has been active in the contemporary art field for more than 20 years, including more than a decade of leadership experience in major museums and prominent arts organizations and educational institutions. An art historian, curator, writer, and educator, Burton's past posts include 10 years as the executive director of the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, the Keith Haring Director and Curator of Education and Public Engagement at the New Museum in New York, Director of the Graduate Program at Bard's CCS, the Center for Cultural Studies in New York, and the Associate Director and Senior Faculty Member at the Whitney's Independent Study Program. She was also the Center for Curatorial Leadership Fellow in 2019. So very pleased to be inviting these incredible three people onto the stage tonight. Before I invite them on the stage, I want to acknowledge that there will be some opportunity for questions and answers portion of the evening. The event is being recorded, so please wait for a mic to be passed by. And then subsequent to that, my colleague Russell Etchen will be on hand to direct the book signing for the evening. So without further ado, please help me welcome Johanna, Charles, and Weiwei.
I will kind of dive right in because it's such an honor to be here with these two incredible artists. And Charles, I've known you a long time, and Weiwei, I've known about you for a long time, but it's our first time meeting. He's taking a picture of the water. I understand. I like it. I will tell you, just because I just found this out, that I've been really excited to meet you today and to talk about some of the ideas, but I found out that your sort of magnetic force is so intense, as we always knew it was, that the hotel he's staying in lost all power after he checked in today, correct? And you had to move out. I've never heard of anything like it. So the best moderators disappear and let the more interesting people on stage talk. I wanted to start by understanding what relationship each of you have to each other's work, because I see many, but I'm curious if you could each speak a little bit to why we're all here and why we're talking about Weiwei's work with you, Charles. So maybe you can kick it off.
Well, back in the 70s, when I was starting to make art as a 2-year-old.
We got it. Yep.
One of the things that I was sort of tangentially thinking about was the relationship between certain strategies of making that conceptualism advanced and content, you know, particularly content is related to in the way content can address my own lived experience as a black person, so there was this bridge, or there wasn't a bridge. There was this gap where I tried to figure out how I could deal with my lived experience and use these strategies of making these essentially intellectual strategies of making that I was really committed to and that I really felt passionate about. And so I was in the midst of that struggle, and so my relationship has to do with how Weiwei solved that problem early in his practice, and managed to develop a way to have, you know, sort of what I call intellectual discursive strategies that come from a conceptualist approach, finding a way to have those merge and merge with political content. I would say just generally discursive meaning, because the conceptual artists in the 60s weren't interested so much in representation and meaning, and but how seamlessly he brought that into being, as if the whole connection was quite natural. And so that's where I think our interests come together, in terms of his acceptance of the title of conceptual art and my embrace of the title too, conceptual artist.
Thank you. I totally agree. And this question is, in a way, exactly set up perfectly by you, Charles, which is, I've heard you described by many people in many different ways. How do you describe yourself when people ask you to talk about the relationship between art and activism?
I see it as one. I never see people, when they start to call me activist, a friend told me, well, Weiwei, that's pretty dangerous because the category. I don't see that. I see that as one. I don't have a strategy or even purpose. I think that is just act of very essential self-expression. in a way, I'm living in a very political world. And so I can't even separate art from being activist.
There's a couple of quotes that I've, over time, associated with you. They're yours. The purpose of art is the fight for freedom, and art is a weapon to achieve human freedom. And I think those configurations, in terms of the kind of binary that people like to impose on art and activism, is done away with here. But there's something else too, and Charles, you brought this up, which is there's a conceptual sort of political modality to both your works. But there's also, and we were talking a moment ago about depth and relationships. There's a heart and there's emotion too. So I will confess, I've not watched all 10 hours and 13 minutes of your film, but I would like to, because I think that the meditation aspect and the time that you immerse yourself in these images has to do also with the human spirit and with the way in which freedom is achieved. How many people have watched all 10 hours and 13 minutes of the film?
I guess there's no one watch. I'm sorry, this is a shorter one. Before that, I did
I'm aware.
Called Beijing 2003. So I was teaching in architecture school, so I forced students to get on a bus, because I told the school I can accept the position of teaching, but I'm allergic to campus. So they said, we don't have money for the bus. I said, I rent it. So we rent a bus. Each day, we draw a map of Beijing, which is a pretty large city, very dense. So the plan is going through every street. So it takes 16 days. So we took one shot in front of the car. That time is no monitor. We have to fix a camera there. So every day started, we push play. Then we start shooting. Then when the car stopped, the next day we start from there. So after 16 days, I got about 150 some hours of footage, just one single take of the whole city, Beijing. That, because it's just one take, we don't have to, when we do editing, we cannot cut off 1 minute or something. So that I can guarantee nobody watched. I played in Tate once, but people maybe see it in like five minutes, then people just would shake their head and leave, So.
There's something sort of lovely about the idea that you can watch the whole film, but it's also the idea of that kind of endurance. So it's 608 Chang'an Boulevard, 608 1-minute segments, correct? For a total of 10 hours and 13 minutes to cross the city.
It's testimony about how we observing or how we receive the information and how impossible to even to get the basic information. And it's just I guess it can be punishment. But if I'm in the jail, in the cell, I would watch the whole thing. People. I also showed in one European, like I think in Switzerland, in front like window of a shop in the public area. So people, they watch, then they take a trip to United States, and then after 3 days they go back, they're still going, and it's after a while it looks like a ghost. Right. It's very much like a ghost. Why it looks like a ghost is because you have a sense of a purpose which you cannot. It doesn't lead into anywhere. Every second in these 150 hours are the same, even. nothing more important than any other moment.
Charles, you too work in that space of repetition and structure that opens up. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I'm not going to ask you how much of the film you've watched, but how does it correspond with some of the work that you do that is also meditative and repetitive and structured? But again, I would argue, it's funny to me that you're talking about it as punishment, but it's also kind of liberation. So will you talk about that in your own process and a little bit in terms of how you relate to Weiwei's work?
For me, what you're referring to is repetition, and it is to advance, and it happens to advance a system that is responsible for what you see and what's produced. So early in my career, I started working with grid and changed and converted images and objects in the world, through photography to a gridded image. And the purpose of that was to take those choices that usually we feel artists make, those subjective choices in making works of art, take that out of the equation and let what is being produced as an image be the consequence of the application of a system or a set of rules. And my interest in doing that was to, it came from just a feeling that I had, and that when I make a work of art, and if I use what's called one's imagination, try to imagine something, and then and try to make an image that reflects in some way that imagined cognitive moment, it doesn't seem like they're connected. In other words, what I think is what I imagined, and the space where this imagined image came from, which would be my subjectivity. The assumption is that what you imagine is the product of your subjectivity, and it may be true, but I never could feel that it was the consequence of my subjectivity. I felt like it was coming from some other, maybe like Mars, or or aliens were like secretly telling me what to make without me knowing it, but the point is that I couldn't feel that it was coming from me. So it made me suspicious about the whole idea of basing the idea of making works of art, or the whole idea of works of art being, or having the single purpose of being a process whereby you can express from the imagination for its own sake. So from thinking and reading and talking to people, I developed this idea that I could take that whole process out of the making and let it be determined by a set of rules. And the grid work, that work was the first instance of where I could apply these rules, and the rules have been the same for that work for almost 50 years. That an image is converted to a gridded image, and then that image is part of a series of like images, like for example, I commonly use the tree, and I use that system to grid the tree and then layer trees on top of each other. And that system then produces a result that I couldn't predict. In other words, it produced things that if I relied on my imagination, I would never come to. So the other part of that, of course, is that, which I didn't realize, was the critical aspect of doing this. What was my critical interest? What was I thinking about the world, trying to frame a system of making art this way? And so what it revealed to me was that, just by my nature, I was interested in analytical strategies, but not for their functional purpose of defining reality, but I was interested in the fact that these analytical strategies, which we think define the reality, don't. That they create their own reality, and that I felt that that a big hoax had been advanced that kept the idea of intellectual thought out of the process of making art, which was that the intention to use analysis to explain things, as I said, was a hoax, but in reality, they don't explain anything, but they actually show you how people fictionalize or imagine or put things together. And therefore, it's not really explaining what it's supposed to explain, but it reveals the gap between that thing that you want explained and the system and means by which you try to fashion the explanation. And that began to put together the idea of what's the political implication of working with systems.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to your film, which in a way is so easy to describe in terms of how it's made, right? It's a system, and you followed it very rigorously. But it's almost 20 years old now, that film. And Claire and I were talking about what does it mean to show it now? You mapped Beijing at a particular political moment. How does it feel to think about it now or to imagine how an audience is watching it?
Well, I didn't even imagine, museums or show works like that. But thanks for your attention and to show works like that. And artists work the way. Actually, artists are in a pretty difficult position to find a language to create a new reality. It's not a very pleasant practice, and that tells the sincerity and the honesty is very often very hard to be accepted. So I am very happy this being showing. And why Chang'an Boulevard? And the Chang'an Boulevard is probably longest boulevard in Beijing. It cut Beijing up like two parts, the northern part or southern part. It just right across. I think Beijing must follow the Russians' city planning. So it's quite, it's very wide and very long. It's about over 40 kilometers long. So when we start from beginning, it's still a rural area. Then gradually you see the film, film would have their own narrative. You don't have to create the narrative. Actually, if you shoot every 50 meters, you just take a 1 minute shot, then you move another 50 meters, then take another shot. So people are moving in front of the camera. Then you see, 1 minute you can see very clearly what is there. And as you come from a very rural area, then you come to a little bit become a urban a city, and then become a financial center. Then come to Tiananmen, which is we used to call Tiananmen is the heart of a world revolution. When we growing up, Chang'an Boulevard is the most political street, and every year you would have huge demonstrations organized by the government to celebrate the glory of a communist society. And will be, I think, around 300,000 people walking, and a big demonstration every May 1st and October 1st, which is the national, new National Day. Then you walking towards the west, then eventually ended up in a Beijing Iron Company, Beijing, 首钢 Capital Iron Company, which also assembles the heavy industrial iron making. So it's really for Chinese, it's a very nice way to look through this whole thing, but nobody cares anyway. So, I'm happy I did it before the Olympics, and it's all disappeared now. So,
What made you, where did the idea come from, though? Do you remember how you sort of decided that was something you wanted to do?
Basically, that time, 2003 or 4, I was very much involved with architecture. I was never, at that time, I was never recognized as an artist. So I started already working with Herzog de Meuron for the 2008 Olympic Stadium. And I realized since it's going to disappear after 2008. So I did several projects. The first one is called 2003 Beijing. And the second one is Chang'an Boulevard. Then I did the second reign and the third reign of Beijing. And it's no passion. It's really, you feel very bored. You feel you want to make something even more boring. So, yeah. True.
Can you speak about boredom in your work? They're going to compete about boredom. I like it. Who's more bored?
Well, it's people that ask me, was it boring? Is it boring to use the word? Because it's a method that's repetitive and it's devoid of imagination. It's a mechanical process to produce the work. But I never felt, when I was doing it all myself, I never felt bored. I was essentially working, writing literally millions of numbers and spending 8-10 hours a day doing that. And the only reason I guess I did it, because I never do that today. The only reason I did it is, well, for one thing I can, because today I can't see the numbers even to write them. But the other reason I did it is because I was like young, right? And so I'd been doing a lot of reading about Zen, and so I made a justification that, well, the reason why I can sit here and do all of this is because I think I'm meditating. And in many ways, the process of making does enter a kind of, it's not anything like Zen meditation, but it enters a kind of meditative space where after you do it for 2 or 3 hours, then you can do it for like a day. There's the first couple of hours that's tough, but then after that, you can keep going until somehow you get it. It reminds me of some of those Warhol movies where if you can get through the first 2 hours, then you sit there all night. But by the hour 2, most people start like screaming and yelling at each other. So I don't know. I mean, in Zen meditation, you don't have that kind of behavior. So I'm sure it's not that, but it's people ask me not only how I managed to put myself through that kind of torture, but they ask me what value it is, and as I was saying before, I was trying to make this comment that I was trying to make a way of making determine a way of making art that is outside what was the perceived ideas of making art, which is the intuitive expression. And so an approach that is really methodological, the process itself, takes you outside of that. And many people think that, well, since you don't use your imagination and your intuition, in the process of making, it must be really boring, but then it's surely different. But it's not boring, it's just because these other things that occur in the process of making that would be boring if you were expecting to realize things from your intuition and your imagination.
Weiwei, I think about you I actually think of both of you as sort of public intellectuals in the world. So you're artists, but you also have a wider range. I was just with our MOCA teens. These are people in high school who want to be in the arts. And they got very excited that you were both down here, which was nice to think about generational impact.
I'm very excited. They're very excited.
No, they were, and I thought that was fantastic. Like, what does it mean as an artist to also have a kind of profile that permeates into a public sphere that's very busy with sort of loud noise? I wondered if, you haven't lived in China in a long time, and this was a piece that was responding to a very particular political moment. Were you to make this kind of portrait again, where would you make such a film? Would you go back to Beijing? Or would you? I think about it as not a documentary, but a portrait, and maybe that's wrong, but it was a portrait of a particular time, a particular political moment. When I think about young people looking at work like this, they're learning about history, but they're also thinking about their own context. So I'm curious if you would make it again, where you would do it.
Well, I think so many things I made it comes naturally. If I look back, it should to come at that kind of moment. But I would say it's not just that kind of moment. It's generally existing in human society. Doesn't matter in Beijing or in California or in Portugal. Now I'm living. So that means I just mentioned my work so much can be refers to the California artist. Yes, because I remember in the 80s, I see a group of photographs he did in about a boulevard in here. So, conceptual art is, it doesn't offer you more. It's about language itself. My work is a little bit conceptualism with a little bit of romanticism. I maybe because my father was a poet, so I always trying to feel the temperature, or that's why I cannot be a pure conceptual artist. I feel sorry about that, but
yeah, I want to say something about that, because that's precisely. If you, I would not identify as a conceptual artist if I had to be defined by what was going on in the 60s. Because it's precisely the privilege of dealing with the poetic or representation, where I think whatever is interesting that happens, and using conceptual tropes where that happens, the conceptual artists weren't interested in that. So, in order to feel comfortable about defining myself as a conceptual artist, I have to disown that part of 60s, and otherwise I would have to agree with Weiwei that, I would have trouble with the definition.
It's easy to distinguish if you see conceptual artists in this kind of conversation. The not real one would zip water. To drink a little bit of water, but the real one will not drink the water.
So I actually want to talk about your father and segue. Okay. And segue to the book a little bit. But if we were going to do Chang'an Boulevard here in California. I'm new to LA, so would it be Pico? Where would it be? Wilshire?
No, you see, the thing is that I would be shooting all the trees on Pico.
Well, that's right. But you both work on trees too. I was thinking about that. But it is kind of a curious question, sort of which is the artery? What street is the artery of a city? And the way in which the sort of politics of a moment, to your point, dissect the city, but how that changes over time. Somebody argued for Pico the other day to me, because I asked this question.
It might be Figueroa, too.
Or Figueroa. So can we talk a little bit about language? And you're both very invested in language. 1,000 Years of Joy and Sorrows is a line from one of your father's poems. Is that correct? Will you
Sure.
talk about him a little bit and the book?
My father, I talked to him about him. He born 1910. So by now he would be 113 years old. But he passed away 1996. 3 years after I decided to go back to China after 12 years being in the United States. And he's a poet, studied in Paris at the beginning of the last century, and the poet at that time would read Baudelaire or Rimbaud, this kind of avant-garde movement. But at that time, he was not poet yet. He was an artist. He's doing very well as an artist. But after he moved back to China, he was arrested and sentenced for 6 years. He's just over 20 years old. And so that in the jail sure he cannot paint anymore, so he become a writer. So after 3 years, he being released, he's already very well known for his poetry. That time jail is much better. You still can bring your poems out if somebody come to see you. If I ended up in jail, I cannot bring out words. It's not possible today. But that time, That's why Jiang Jieshi lost his power, because he's just too loose. Communists will never allow anybody bring out anything. For many people in jail, for years, nobody know where this guy is. Even after you're released, like some people, still we don't know where this guy is. He's just being relocated into another sacred place. So I'm sorry if I talk about anything that has to relate to some kind of reality there. So my father certainly had a big influence on me about poetry or art. And make it short, it's just like that.
And when you titled the book, which is essentially a memoir, what's the meaning of that line?
Well, almost at the end of his life, he regained this kind of respect from the nation, and now he's still being named as the poet of the people or the nation, and his poetry being studied in schools. But he wrote a poetry about a city which is in Xinjiang, actually, is a very northwest, where he was exiled. And in that city, there's in that province, there was a city like Bombay, it completely covered by desert. It's no human life traces. So basically, the poetry says the city used to be, so must be very prosper, a lot of people or horses or, businessmen, but now we don't see any life. So there's a sentence to say, after this 1,000 years of joys and sorrows, that whoever still alive should enjoy the life and do not try to imagine will leave any traces for the, it's pretty sad story. And I never liked that poetry because I was very young to read poetry like that. But now I gradually also share that sensitivity. We as human being, each generation we make a lot of effort. We're trying to make a mark about our feelings or even our political stands or moral stands, but that is only humans' effort. The whole universe we can easily sense is pretty dark and pretty cold, and also without human being, the planet is still there. It's not necessarily we should dominate it, but we are dominated, and at the same time we are destroying many lives. So some kind of tragic miracle.
It's beautiful. Charles, will you talk about your relationship to language in your work as well?
Yes, the part of the investigation I was talking about earlier about sort of deconstructing subjectivity, and it was really required me to investigate how that operates in language, and discovered in my research that it's generally felt that meaning comes from two poetic tropes. One is metonyms, and the other is metaphor. And these tropes were taken by certain ideological positions. So metonym is literal, and so without poetry, and metaphors is subjective and with poetry. So I thought that I might be able to unpack this idea of the critique of subjectivity by looking more closely at these two tropes, and found. I mean, the thing that I found myself was that they worked intricately together. That you can't engage a metaphor without engaging metonyms, and you can't entertain metonyms without being able to have a metaphoric read of it. And that this interlinking process is what underscores the construction of meaning. So what I wanted to do was to, particularly with metaphors, to explain how it was dependent upon culture. That it wasn't the metaphor, it was not simply a product of the imagination, how we interpret analogically some kind of trope or image, but that whatever we interpret as a pure function of our subjectivity, I wanted to show that interpretation is heavily dependent upon our cultural knowledge. I was reading, there's this poem that Emerson wrote that I thought is quite beautiful, and I'm not going to recite it because I can't remember it. But what he was suggesting is that the beautiful is not found in the song of a bird or the color of the sky and so forth, the most beautiful can be found among the detritus, among the spoiled and what we might call the problematic, sublime sentiment that comes out of encountering things that are truly a product of struggle. And I thought that that was really interesting, because what he's trying to say was, what he did say, and I'm trying to say, is that it's not that the detritus is beautiful, is that that's where you find the beauty. That's where you find that voice of beauty amidst that. And I thought that if in fact we have this interest in the sentiment of beauty with respect to works of art, that can only come from the unpacking of the problems of the world. That outside of that, if you just want to experience something that's beautiful, all that is like just protecting us, or letting us self-indulge, as I say, but if you're actually interested in that sentiment itself, as something that is actually existing in the world, rather than something that's self-indulgent, you have to get it out of an interrogation of the complexities of the world. And that's why I analogize his notion of detritus. And what better than politics? So I mean, the interesting thought is that, which I say this, so I might change my mind about the whole theory, but the rantings and ravings of Trump, all right? It's not that Trump is a manifestation of beauty, but understanding the chaos he produces requires you to think in ways and encounter those moments of beauty. It's not a product of what he says. What I'm saying is that it can be only engaged if you actively interrogate it, and not just embrace it, but interrogate it and pack it up, to take it apart, and you find that the beautiful voice.
It's great. I feel like in a moment we'll turn this over for questions, but the last thing I'll ask is, both of you in various ways have talked about art as a space of possibility and hope, but also resistance. And it's something that, when I'm speaking with teens about, it allows me to really believe that what we do as a museum and as artists matters. Do you still feel that there's that space? And again, it's a complex space. It's neither just, I'm going to make sure you weren't saying there's beauty around Trump just for my own edification, but I know exactly what you mean. But it is a space we have to fight for, and we have to continue to argue for as almost a basic need. And I think that that's something that you're both talking about. So, Weiwei, if you'll have the last word here, what are you, how are you talking about and thinking about your own practice today?
Well, my practice, I drink some water.
Should do that. Or your life, or however you want to talk about it.
Actually, I'm not, I don't have much purpose in my life. That's why it's very hard for me to talk about my practice, because I don't even set up a temporary goal. And many things, if I look back, I've been forced or squeezed into certain conditions or circumstance. And it's just like the phone dropped down. It's not you designed. It surprised me, and and I try to pick it up, but it's more close to you. It looks better when you pick it up. So yeah, it's for me. Life is basically extension of this kind of act. I would never think I would live in a very clear, conscious, or draw some kind of absolute conclusion. I'm dealing with the situation, and I trying to find some joy in there, and it helps me passing through the time. Thank you.
So I'm sure people have some questions if you all want to get started.
This is for Weiwei, and you touched on this several times before, but I was wondering if you could give some advice about the dangers of video and filmmaking, and in art in general. You know, you have a wide array of working in different countries.
The danger of making work in different areas?
Yes,
Film in
it's
particular?
very different here and in Germany than it is working in China, of course. But if you could have, if that enters your practice, it seems to me that maybe that the dangers don't enter that, but for somebody starting out, you know, what would you suggest?
I guess the question is in dealing with our how we survive in this well, my case is not very convincing, because almost every day I would wake up in very different hotel. I first have to try to see where is the light switch. Then take me a second to figure out, you know, because they all designed differently. Some you turn, some you try the every way. Even you knock on it, it doesn't working. Then you give up and the light comes up, you know. Same to the shower, you know. I don't know why we have to design so many different ways. Either very hot, very cold, or, you know, it doesn't. I have a problem to catch the intelligence of a human society, and also not even to talk about scientific development. I think why we have to go so far and so fast. You know, we don't even have a chance to see every step. So, unfortunately, I'm already 66, and it's not much distance I have to go. So, I take it easy, and you know, that's the general condition I can give to you.
Is there another question?
Hi. I wanted to ask, in the filming and making the Chang'an Boulevard, it seemed you were both talking about process in your art making, and it seemed very consistent, the 1 minute, each different phase 1 minute, except one bit we watched, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like there was one particular frame, at least one, in the short time we watched, that did go on longer. It was when you saw there was a truck pulled up, and the workers were shoveling the snow into the back of the truck, and it moved, and then they would do the next little bit of snow, and it seemed like it was much longer than all of the other takes. And it made me wonder if, when you were making the film, did you ever, in your mind, think, I want something unusual to happen? Or did you, in your mind, ever think, I don't want anything unusual to happen. I want it to be as plain, as regular, or is it just completely observing and letting things happen?
In my case, I guess the question is towards this film. I totally agree. Art is a very essential practice. Is trying to find a language to illustrate, or whatever you can call it, idea or emotion or concept existing or there. But very often we are seeking a language, but we forget we are only become artists because we are trained by the language. The language we trying to find to make us become artists. So artist is basically a product of the searching of this almost impossible, or it's just same concept as a freedom. Very often people would say we have the freedom and you don't have the freedom, which I don't think so. Once you see you have the freedom and you don't have the freedom, so the one do not have the freedom may also have the freedom. So this is for me is some kind of concept when you talk about freedom.
One of the things that you said tonight that was just brilliant is the way you explained how narratives and these repetitive sequences, how the sequence itself produces its own narrative. And that's, brilliant.
Well, a brilliant sentence always comes from very dumb mind. We can prove it now, It's true. Warhol says that. Suddenly I remember he said, in the 70s, I think the people around him sometimes have such a brilliant sentence, but he realized that the guy basically is incapable in dealing with daily life. But, that's what Warhol says.
Hi, I guess this is a question for both of you. And I know that, Charles, you mentioned that you were inspired by Ai Weiwei. And I just wonder, how frequently do you see an idea from your contemporaries and be like, wow, that might be something I want to explore and I want to try going in that direction for your art?
Well, and I guess in my case, it isn't that it's inspiration or that excitement I find in looking at work and looking at that is very different from my own. That I can embrace all kinds of practices and find things that really inspire me. But my own work is so rule based. It might be there might be a good reason why nobody else will do work like mine. But it's so internally structured that I can't find anything outside that I can, I guess, be. And it sounds terrible, but I'm not. It's just I'm condemned to make this really kind of work that is based upon this kind of closed system. So it only opens up in terms of the way it interrogates content. But as a process, it's so closed. But on the other hand, I find work that around me and seeing exhibitions, and as you said, Ai Weiwei's work, which is legitimately inspirational to me. I find that all the time. And a lot of people think that because my work is so sort of intellectually based, that I would not be very very interested in the works of others. But it's finding that difference in the works of others that keep me interested in my own work.
She wants to know what other artists you look at or are inspiring to you, and it had to do especially with peers, right? But probably you could talk about anybody. Or you could talk about nobody.
I'm a bit shy to talk about that. Once I was in Parsons study art history, and then I give a test. I just sign my name on a blank paper and give back to the history teacher. It's not I don't like to write about this, but I'm not so capable, because my knowledge about it doesn't give me the rights to even make that kind of, so I think I'd rather not to do that. But what really talk about yesterday. Last night when we arrived, we said, okay, that's a chance we walk out. Every city I go, I like to walk out. I think only by walking you understand the city, which I think maybe people will not agree because everybody driving here. And until today, I still don't know how to drive, so we walked. We're trying to find a place to eat. But we went to the area, getting darker, the light become a little bit cold color, those closed stores. Then we realized there's a lot of homeless people there. So then you start to imagine, okay, people always telling me they could be dangerous. But of course, I'm not afraid of danger. I get a little bit excited. Then I see something which very impressive to me, actually shocked me. I see a box, a normal box you throw away. It moves, on the side of a street. Then I realized that somebody squeezed into the box. You don't see the human, but you see the box a little bit moving. That's just like a trash box, and somebody may kick on it or just. But the box is really next to the traffic. And then I would think why he doesn't choose another location, and that kind of thing always shocked me more than any artworks. I cannot figure out, it's just a moment, something I may never figure out in my life. So.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and then we will turn to book signings.
This is a question for Weiwei. I know that you said that maybe you don't necessarily feel a ton of purpose, but I'm wondering if you had a piece or two of advice to give a young artist, or perhaps something that you maybe wish that your younger self had known about practice or art making when you were starting out.
Sorry, I'm very, very bad at this. I was in Yale Art School a few days ago. It's a very nice school, and so I give a talk. Last thing they asked me, as always, how to give some advice to students. I just burst out to say to quit. The dean looked at me and said, "What?" I said, "To quit." That's what I feel, because I never think if I become artist today, it's really because I quitted several times. I think I will never make it, and I don't even care I make it or not. Then suddenly something comes back. Life is a miracle. If you really want something, Warhol said, "Be careful, you may really get it." I would say, if you really want something, forget about it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.